Raymond, it is so good to see your face on my Zoom right now. I'm so
Thank you.
excited to talk to you.
Delighted to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, and I love that you are writing children's books. I have three small children, so any
Oh,
resources that I can use are just so appreciated.
you're very kind. Well, look, I wanted to write for kids, really through my own experience of being a dad, and wanting to give them things that were both fun and exciting to them, as well as leaving them with something a little nourishing on the back end, which is what you want from great and any children's literature. I mean, I remember reading my kids Peter Pan and Jungle Book and Treasure Island. And the beautiful thing about it is you have a memory of these things as a child. But
Mhm.
when you read them as an adult to your own children, the story starts to shift on you. It becomes something very different and better and richer. And that's what I wanted and want from all my works for families, really.
Well, and your latest book is about Thomas Alva Edison, a brilliant inventor. I want to hear from you why you decided to focus your book on his story in particular and really focusing on the influence his mother had on him.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to do a series and an historic series that touched on great lives. Okay. And so I started prowling around looking for lives that I was interested in or biographies I'd read. And by accident, I had an Edison biography on the shelf. And in the back of it, there was an interview with Edison that he did late in life. And he said, "My mother was the making of me. She let me follow my bent, and if it weren't for her appreciation and her faith in me at a critical moment in my experience, I should never have become an inventor." And I thought to myself, wait a minute, the mother was the making of him? How did this happen? How did I miss this? So I went back and I dug into that little moment of the story. And the Turnabout Tales series, the entire series, every one of these lives will profile, they really focus on a crisis point in this person as a young individual, as a young person. And, the little motto we have for the series is challenges faced, paths changed, and history turned. Because that's what happens. Many of us think when you have a crisis, when you have a setback, that that's the end of the road, that all is lost. No. And I think it's important to remind young people and slightly older people that these crisis points are sometimes the pathway to your true destiny and what God's really calling you to do. And that's what happens in Edison's tale. He is thrown out of school at a very young age, and the teacher says he's addle-brained and can't be taught. And his mother, Nancy, who was an educator, said, "No, there's a spark in my boy. He's curious. I'll take him home and homeschool him myself." And
Mhm.
that's what she does. And that, by the way, is the last formal schooling of Thomas Edison when he was thrown out of that school in second grade. So, yeah, and he's only the greatest inventor of all time. And it's much to do with the training that his mother allowed him and I think introduced him to.
What were some of these values that his mother really did instill in him during her time homeschooling him?
Well, I tell people all the time now, Edison should really be the patron saint of homeschoolers because here was a kid thrown out of school. The mother homeschools him. She was very regimented in the books she introduced him to, the classics as well as scientific books and books about electricity, which was on his mind, something that intrigued him. But there were some principles that actually later in life he reflected on, things his mother ingrained in him that I think still apply to all of us. And the first thing was never get discouraged if you fail, learn from it. And I mean, this was a kid that, as you can see in the unexpected light of Thomas Alva Edison in my picture book, he burns down the family barn. He
Mhm.
blows up the basement. He torches a baggage car where he has a mobile lab. I mean, this was not a kid that did things quietly or solemnly. There were big repercussions of his experiments and his learning, but it was failure, a process of elimination that really was the making of Thomas Edison. That's how he created these inventions. The second thing is learn with your body, your hands, and your head. Your hands and your head. He was a tinkerer. He built and struggled with puzzles in life, and he was not afraid to get dirty. That's a big lesson here, that his mother sort of let him down. And the other thing is, never stop learning. Read the entire panorama of literature, which he did from a
Mhm.
very young age. When he was 11 years old, he was a hustler working on a train. He was selling newspapers and snacks. During the 6-hour layover, he would go to the Detroit Public Library and start reading from the bottom of the shelf to the top of the shelf every day. That's the kind of dedication, and I think habit of learning that followed him through the rest of his life.
Well, what can parents take away from the life of Thomas Edison, especially amid the rise of technology? There's so much information coming at us all the time. It's difficult to know how exactly to teach our children. What can we learn from this?
Well, Leah, I've spoken to a number of biographers, Edison biographers, and they all seem to be in agreement that if he were alive today, he would probably have been diagnosed with ADHD. He
Mhm.
could not focus on one thing. He was running around. But some say, oh, well, that's how terrible. It's a malady. No, 6 million kids are diagnosed with ADHD. And what Nancy Edison did was accommodate the learning to suit her child. She accommodated the study so he could absorb the material in the best way possible. And, there are stories of Edison so hyper focused on his experiments, he would nap on the shelves of his lab. He would move the beakers and the materials away, nap for a few hours, roll off the shelf, and continue his experiments because he didn't want to even go home. He was so intent on solving them. But the genius of that mind was he could keep multiple puzzles active at the same time. So we would work on 2 or 3 different things at once. So the ADHD that his mother accommodated actually was the pathway and the reason, I think, he was
Mm.
able to create such incredible things. The phonograph, the motion picture camera, the first voting machine, the light bulb, the electric grid, the dynamos and the alkaline battery. All of those things would never have been possible were it not for the training of Nancy Edison and the mind of her son, Thomas.
That's incredible. Now,
Yeah.
Raymond, why are public schools today replacing some of these historic American
Mm.
figures with substitutes that really don't provide a lot of inspiration or wisdom for young
Yeah.
children?
Leah, that's such a great question. And it's part of the reason I wanted to create this Turnabout Tales series, because it was a way of reintroducing young and old people to these American lives, and maybe not American lives in some cases, but mostly American lives, great lives, lives well lived. And I think we risk something if we ignore them or forget them. The remembrance of great lives furnish us not only with a marker of who these people were, but the lessons and the wisdom that they gained are things we need to surpass their example, to continue growing. The same way Edison took a light bulb. The arc light was already created by the time Edison came around. What he did was perfect an incandescent bulb, a bulb that would light and stay lit for a longer period of time. That really was his contribution. But again, he would always say, I built on the failure of others. He
Mhm.
said, I built on the failure of others. And someone asked him or said, you're a genius. He said, no, sticking to it is the genius. And what that means is staying in the puzzle, staying engaged. That's the genius, not giving up. And I feel the same way about our history. We can't let this go and pretend that these great lives didn't happen, or that we aren't still the beneficiaries of what they gave us. I mean, the light I'm under now, this is Edison. The way we're communicating, the microphone, Edison created that. He created the microphone. So these things we take for granted, if you're going to use their gifts, you have to figure out where those gifts came from and what can I learn from them and incorporate into my own life. We ignore history at our own peril, and I think by not sharing that history with our children, we deprive them of something so important. So I'm hoping to make a positive contribution and remember these great lives, and not only that, intrigue people about them and
Yeah.
the lessons that are furnished therein.
What do you think is behind this push, though, in schools to erase some of these stories? Why is culture so insistent on doing that?
I don't know. I think a part of it is people who want to remake the future in their own image. and want to
Mhm.
ignore the past. You know, if you have no past, then you can kind of breathe everything to come from your own mind, from your own heart. I think that's very dangerous because man doesn't change. His
Right.
sins and his glories are usually the same. What was that great line from Mark Twain? History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And and I think that's true. But we better get we better understand the melody if we're marching forward, because we're part of a chain here, Leah. We're not isolated in our own little moment. We are part of the people who brought us to this point. And it's important for us to know them and mark them and revere them, or take lessons from the bad choices, the bad decisions they made. When you don't do that, you suffer those sins again and again and again. And I don't know quite why people, I think part of it is they feel that somehow there's something flawed about the history of the past that they are better than
Mhm.
and have surpassed. I'm not sure that's true. I don't think we're any better than anybody else. In fact, I think in some ways we're a lot worse.
Yeah.
So it's important to mark history and abide by its lessons.
Yeah. Raymond, what encouragement do you have for parents who are trying to figure out the best way to school their children? You know, my kids aren't in school yet, but even we don't know what we're doing yet. There's so many options out there. There's so much different information. What advice or wisdom do you have?
Well, I'll tell you, and a little of this is taken from the Edison model, a little of this from, I've been doing this for a number of years now, going, visiting schools, writing for children. I see a lot of children, and I'll share with you an interesting story. It's not about what you do. It's about remaining close to your child. Nancy Edison was standing by Thomas Edison. There's a reason in his old age he said she was the making of me, because it's not what you teach them, it's that you're there for them and allow them and give them the confidence to teach and grow and be their own person, to find their own vocation. That's what she did. I went to a maximum security prison of all places. A friend of mine was working on a film, and we went there last week. And there was a big burly guy working in the welding shop. And he came over and he had tears in his eyes because he was so proud that he had passed the welding certification. And he said, I wouldn't have been able to do this except for a man who was related to one of the wardens, who befriended me, treated me tough like his own child. And when I went to take the test, he sat next to me throughout the testing. And he started tearing up at that point. And he said, I never had a mother or a father who cared about me until this man. And I'm so grateful for that. And it kind of took my breath away, and it reminded me that we all need loving parents who walk with us and accompany us. Because only when you're in that close proximity to the child will you know what makes them tick, what their interests are, what their triggers are, and
Mhm.
how they learn best. And every child learns different. Look, I've got 3 children, Leah. A little bit of advice. None of them are the same. You
Yeah.
can't, they all went to 3 separate schools because each one needed their own approach. And you have to be nimble enough and attentive enough to accommodate wherever they are. And so a lot of this is, it's a step-by-step thing. Most important thing you can do, read to them regularly, because that bond, and we have evidence of this scientifically, the way the synapses start connecting at a very young age. I'm talking infants. When you start reading to them, the sound of the mother and father's voice connecting to that child in a very deep way. All of that connection and your life experience, your values, your faith, your knowledge of the world, all of that is being imparted to them in ways you don't even fully understand. And the reverse of it is you're also learning a great deal from them and seeing the world in a new way. I kind of envy you because now I'm going to cry. Having young children, it's such a beautiful gift because it does open you up to a whole new experience, and you see the world perhaps for the first time through the eyes of your children. And it's a magical, a beautiful, a blessed moment. So I hope you and everybody take and apprehend every moment of that. It goes very quickly, but it's so important.
Well, Raymond, thank you so much for being a part of equipping parents with these kinds of resources that we do have that we can impart to our children. It is so
Sure.
needed. So appreciate you.
Well, I appreciate you. Thank you for having me on, and you know, spend time reading, whether it's one of my turnabout tales or any of the other great literature out there. Give kids things that are both nourishing and exciting for them, fun, and gives them something to take with them after the story's over. I think that's really important.